Dang it. Dang it. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Let's hit the music. Oh yeah, that's the music. I hit the music, but I also hit the wrong button, so we're already live. Isn't that crazy? That's crazy talk. But that's exactly what happened right here, right now, today. Hold on while I get this thing out of the way. Come on, IMNSHOW. I want you gone. All right, we'll do that the manual way. This has been a day, let me tell you. And listeners to the podcast live stream, well, put it this way, IMNSHOW, in my not so humble opinion, with a W on the end to make it a show, TM. That's where I get to come on here and talk about whatever I want to talk about, because guess what? In this day and age, you have the entire globe worth of channels available to you to share exactly what you think if you take advantage of them. So that's what I'm doing today with my special guest, who we're actually going to be recording a couple episodes of the Nonfiction Brand podcast, which comes out every Monday. But you can see her right there on the screen right now, Anika Jackson. And first of all, Anika, welcome to the Nonfiction Brand podcast.
Well, DP Knudten, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I wanted to have you on because obviously we met each other fairly recently via the interwebs. And one of the things that's really cool about those interwebs is that you don't have to meet everybody and like everybody. But when you have a chance meeting with someone that you actually gel with, it's like, where have you been all my life? And the answer is, well, I've been a couple thousand miles away, or 1,000 miles away. But anyway, Anika and I met each other, and she invited me to speak to her class at the University of Southern California, which was very cool because a lot of people don't know this, but I was a Trojan for all of one semester working towards an MFA in acting. I didn't get that MFA, but I did get a DNF, a did not finish. However, I'm really happy to be talking to Anika. Anika, first of all, you're a professor, an adjunct professor. Is that the title with the University of Southern California? What exactly are you teaching at the Annenberg School? Okay, there's the Annenberg School of Marketing and Communications, but there's also the Annenberg School of PR and Communications, or?
We're the School of Communications and Journalism.
Oh, okay.
The official.
There you go. Well, anyway, Anika's there and she's teaching graduate level classes in, well, I'm not going to tell you. Anika, take it away. Tell us what you are teaching those lovely master's level people at the University of spoiled Southern California.
It's funny because yes, I think that used to be more appropriate than it is now. Because now there's so much diversity on campus, which I love. And it's a big push for the university. So I am a part-time professor and I teach in two different master's programs. One is the MS in Digital Media Management. And this semester I'll be teaching digital content creation for that. And before I've taught some other classes for it. And then for the PR and advertising MA, I teach PR and branding this semester, and I've taught a few other classes as well. Then I'm also recently the co-host and co-producer of the Mediascape speaker series, which we are turning into a podcast.
Of course. Well, you have to when you've got a property like that and one that has a brand name like USC associated with it. You have to take advantage of that. Otherwise, you're just leaving that proverbial opportunity on the table. And I certainly recognize the value of that. And I really enjoyed being invited to speak to your class because, again, we are just getting to know each other. So you took a chance on me and I gave you a double barrel of the DP shotgun. And I think it went pretty well.
It went really well. And it was perfect timing because we are talking about branding and PR. And the way I approach it with the class is let's develop your personal brands first, as we're also exploring brands out in the world that you might work with in your corporate careers or your entrepreneurship career, whatever you decide to do after you leave USC. But it's really important to know who you are. And so many of us don't know that person until we're much older than my students. So if they even have a little head start on their personal brand and understand how that applies to making them different in the marketplace, give them their special VOV, right? That they have, that they can offer to a future employer, whether it's a brand, an agency, an individual, that is going to help them get so much further ahead. And they're going to understand better how to brand their clients. And I start with brand first, right? You have to have your brand really dialed in before we can really do a great job on your PR or your social media or your other communication strategies.
Oh, amen. I mean, there have been so many minor imbroglios about, well, let's see, Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis and, all sorts of other people who've stepped in stuff that is absolutely counter to their brand. Like Ashton Kutcher is probably the best example of that right now, where
Oh
he and
gosh.
Demi Moore, his then wife, started a nonprofit called Thorn that was all about helping trafficked
Mm-hmm.
women and children and things like that. And then he writes a letter in favor of one of his former castmates from that '70s show, who actually is going away for 30 years for rape. Not a good brand fit there, Ashton. And the funniest thing is, if anybody saw the video apology where Mila Kunis was next to Ashton
Mm-hmm.
Kutcher, you could read her face. And she was like, I knew I shouldn't have done that, Ashton. You told me I should
Mm.
do that. And she blamed him, but she also hated herself for doing it because she knew her brand just blew up in not a good way. There is such a thing as bad press, and both
Oh,
Ashton and Mila are finding that out big
they're
time.
not they're not the only ones. And now it's starting to resurface, right, about things that they said when they were younger about, oh, we can't wait till so and so turns 18 and is dateable, talking about other celebrities, other actresses, people who are musical artists. But then we also see things with like the writer's strike out here. um, Drew Barrymore has also stepped in it and is now losing a lot of the credibility that she's gained over the past few years, because those of us who know Drew Barrymore, we know her as like Little Girl Lost and all the things she did when she was younger, and all of the issues she had with substance abuse while she was creating this great career. And then she was kind of this wild, crazy child. And now she is a great show hostess. However, going against the writers and deciding to bring her show has created a lot of ill will towards her. And so there's, it's really interesting to look at celebrity as the barometer of brand, and how one little mistake for them is it's a much bigger mistake than you or I could make. We can make a mistake, but it's not going to be as public, especially if we don't share it on social media. But if you're at that level, you really have to evaluate, is this authentically me or not?
Well,
Do I,
exactly.
you
And if, again, we can point to an example that most people would be aware of, this is several years old, but Colin Kaepernick, when he took the knee in
yeah.
protest at some football games and, everything blew up, he got fired. But, and this is the key, but Nike embraced him as part of their brand, so you
Yeah.
got two brands there. You got Colin Kaepernick and you've got Nike. Both brands are very much aligned in one or two key areas. One is performance and
Yes.
and leadership, if you will, or being at the front. Let's say they're both at the forefront brands. They are not follower brands. They are leading brands. And so
Mhm.
Colin Kaepernick is leading on the Black Lives Matter side of things, and Nike is leading on the, hey, uh, most of our constituency who buys
Mhm.
our products are on Colin's side, and we don't mind losing the golf club crowd as much because we know
Yeah.
the young golf club guys are probably along with us anyway. So we're going to lead. We're going to be aligned as two brands going in the same direction and to fantastic results. Nike is still around. Colin Kaepernick
Yeah.
isn't playing football, but he's still relevant as a
Oh, he's
brand in the marketplace.
exactly. And part of Nike's ethos is the athlete in all of us, right? They make high performance gear for athletes. They consider if you are a living, breathing human, you're an athlete, right? You might not be performing at a high level as a professional athlete, but you're still going to be walking your dog, going for a run, yoga, whatever you decide to do in your daily life, or your once a month or once a week hike with friends, whatever that the case may be, depending on where you live. But they understood that for their brand value, they're looking at everybody, not just as a small elite amount of people, and to really look at the values of the people who are frankly also going to buy the drops when a new sneaker drops and it's going to cost several $100s. Who is buying that? It's not the elite crowd of golfers or you know, whoever you're thinking of. It's people. And
Well,
so they want
yeah,
to make sure that they're really.
and both brands too have this streak of rebellion in them, because there have been brands that associate with big athletic stars forever, but the stars that Nike chooses to align with always have a little bit of edge to them. Even early days with Tiger Woods, he was absolutely disrupting the game of golf. If you think about it,
Yeah.
15 years ago, he literally came on the scene and turned golf on its head in a way that all of a sudden the old white guy image of golf was re-energized by this young guy who could drive like crazy and who just was so thrilling to watch. Now, I could argue that he lost some of his edge when he started to lose his brand when, and every marriage is different. I don't know what was going on with that marriage, but when that marriage broke up, a little bit, his brand was tarnished. Then when he got in that accident, driving a car too fast and stuff, it was very murky as to what was actually going on. But it was clear that, he was injured physically, but his brand took a huge hit too, because it's like, are you substance abusing? Are you not? What was going on? That doesn't seem like the performer that I know. So again, that's another brand that kind of was getting a little bit out of alignment. And, if you're talking to PR professionals about, one, defining their brand as PR professionals so that they can then help create and disseminate and communicate the story of the brands of the people they serve, those are very, very important things to understand that concept of alignment. Do you know what I'm saying? What I'm saying when I say alignment?
Oh, yeah. Well, just yesterday after class, a student came up to me who had really wanted to focus on sports, athletes, celebrities, working she actually mentioned Nike. So working in that vein. And another student, the first day of class, because they all went around and introduced themselves, I made them I invited them, I should say, to bring an object that they felt represented who they were as a brand. And so this one student was like really into sports. The other student said, "Oh, I would not do sports. There's no money in it. It's just a lot of long hours." So the first student got a little discouraged. And after class yesterday, she came up and said, "I've really been thinking about this and struggling because that is who I am. That is what I want to do for a career." And I said, "Then you have to lean into it. You can't let somebody else get you out of alignment on your goals and what you'll be best at. Not only for yourself, because you'll be bringing your whole self to your job, but you'll be able to better represent and work with these brands and these athletes and these celebrities because you're pouring your passion into this." And
Yeah.
so, I think that's a lot of the trouble. People aren't sure who they are. And I know this is a huge thing for especially graduate students to be going through because they don't really know who they are yet, but it's what's going to make it different for them when they do look for their jobs.
Well, I talked to one of your students afterwards because that Andre Carr,
Oh, yeah.
he's unstoppable. He sees a door and to him it's like the tape at the end of a race, and he runs through the tape,
Oh, yeah.
Good, and I applaud him for that. But he reached out to me and said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a few minutes?" And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. Why not?" And he mentioned, we were talking about what he wants to do, and it revolves around music. And music, when you say music, it could be music, entertainment, venue management, or, artist management, or, actually working A&R at a record label, or there's so many different things you can do there, especially in the PR space, because every musician needs to have a brand that cuts through. And do you know a woman named Anna Lapwood on TikTok?
I
Okay,
don't.
bear with me. There are a couple of TikTok people that I would love for every listener to check out and actually follow because they're so instructive. Anna Lapwood is I don't know how old she is. I'd say she's around 30, probably a little bit younger than 30, but she is, get this, a pipe organist. She plays pipe organs, but she doesn't just play any pipe organs. She plays the, I don't know, 5,000 pipe organ at the this venue in London. What is it? Albert Hall.
Wow.
And Albert Hall is this beautiful circular venue, and everybody's played there. Rock and roll, classical music. I saw, what's her name? Casey Musgraves recorded a whole TV special at Royal Albert Hall in London. But anyway, she just started setting up her camera as she would practice in the middle of the night, because the reality is, if you're an organist, you can't play on the real organ during the day when everybody's there. You have to come in the middle of the night to do your practicing. So she'd be there at 2 a.m. She would set this up and she would play just everything, ranging from the soundtrack from the movie Interstellar, the Hans Zimmer soundtrack, to, Bach cantatas, you name it. And she would record this and people were like, this is so cool. And then she started sharing what was happening. And there's a band that's kind of it's not pure EDM, electronic dance music, but it's more, it's kind of driving rhythms and stuff like that, but they have live musicians. It's not just purely electronic. They were performing at Royal Albert Hall for several nights, and she was there as they were kind of wrapping up, getting ready for, I think it might have been right before their last night, the night before their last night. And so she was playing all that stuff, and all of a sudden, over her shoulder, you can see the camera, up comes one of the guys from the band, Bonobos, and he says, wow, hey, if we wrote you some music to go with one of our songs, could you play that with us?
Wow.
And she did that. And the next night, and of course she was recording that or live streaming it even, as it happens. And the stuff they wrote for her was using all the big fat pipes that literally rumble almost subsonically. So the whole building shakes. Oh my gosh. And their finale piece for the final concert she played, the place went nuts. She has parlayed this. And, she's a very pleasant looking person, but she's not model pretty. She's just a regular human being. She plays a pipe organ, for crying out loud. And she was able to parlay these TikToks into 2 albums released by Sony Classical, that record label, because one, she's so flippin' popular on TikTok, and it's amazing. So there's her, Anna Lapwood, but there is someone that, especially in the PR space, I love to follow, Molly McPherson. She is a PR professional for crisis communications, and she serves a whole lot of people, but what she does on TikTok is very fast, live, or briefly recorded reactions to whatever the PR thing of the day is. And, anybody interested in PR, you got to follow Molly McPherson, because she's so good at deconstructing what the real problem is. The other thing that I study about her is how she does what she does and how it reflects who she is. That, the big trio for nonfiction branding is who you are, what you do, and how you do it. She is a masterclass. She demonstrates her brand in every single video she does. You may not agree with her 100% of the time, but boy, she's always entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah. She's living into her authenticity. And that's something that when you because I haven't worked at the big agencies like you have. I've mostly been an independent practitioner, worked in house, worked with small brands or smaller agencies. And one thing that you have to do when you're starting your own company, you don't always, and you should, but if you don't have the customer personas all dialed in, you quickly learn who you can really serve and who you can't, and how you can live in your authenticity. And when you get out of that, that's when things start going the wrong way, right? I worked for an agency once that I thought was the right fit and got in there. And after 6 months, realized that our values didn't match. So I had to course correct and I just exited. I just quit. Didn't have a backup plan. So, but I knew what I had to do for myself to feel like I was able to serve the clients that I wanted to serve in a way that was meaningful to them and to me. And so it sounds like she's an amazing example of that. Like really, dialing in, she's dialed into who she is. She's going to live in her authenticity. And this is a conversation I've been having a lot with people on the podcast at all levels of success in business, is that pinnacle moment when they really realized who they were and what they wanted to do is when everything changed for them and they found success, whatever metric they're measuring it on. It's not always financial, right? Maybe it's they wanted to travel more, spend more time with their kids, and have enough money to do that and feel like they were not, the roof wasn't going to fall in. And I find that for myself too. And I actually just was in a book called Business on Purpose, Volume 2, and it's about women in business who overcame to find our purposes and how we weave that into our businesses. So anytime that you can do that, and mine goes through my whole kind of life story and how I always knew I was going to be in PR and marketing because I love collaborating and communicating and creating environments where people can be celebratory of whatever it is, right? Whether it's a cause or because they did something great themselves, just let's celebrate each other. And that's our job, is creating those moments of celebration and recognition for our clients. But so if you don't have buy-in to who they are and your brand and your mission doesn't match with who they are, it's not going to be as successful.
Oh, you are so right. I mean, one of the things that I'm inspired by the generations coming up now, millennials and whatever sub millennials, whatever we're calling them these days. I'm so inspired by the fact that so many of them will not stay at a job that does not fulfill them, or sure, they're going to have to work. Some days are going to be worse than others, but if it's a total mismatch, boom, I'm going to quiet quit, or just plain, Irish exit, where I'm just not showing up one day and then emailing saying, hey, can you send me my last paycheck? And they're like, what? You quit? Yeah. Why? I didn't feel like working for you. Now that, to me, being, I'm an older guy, right? We never quit anything without a backup job waiting for us, because we were, taught by our parents who lived through world wars or, depressions and stuff like that. So it's a wonderful place to be at when you can realize that, this work doesn't fulfill me. Yeah, I could make as much working as a barista at Starbucks, so I can get enough money to go maybe travel abroad for a year. So I think I'll do that. It's like, really? And the answer is, yeah, if you know who you are, what you do, and how you do it, you get to choose. And one of the things you kind of alluded to in your story there was, you aren't wasting your time on the people you cannot serve best.
Right.
Instead, you can lavish your attention and your passion and your energy on the people who get what you do and appreciate it. Oh, and by the way, are willing to pay for it without, bitching about what's on the invoice.
Right.
Once you can do that, once you feel comfortable with that, all of a sudden your free time is filled up with possibilities to find other people who appreciate you as you are, not as how you think you might need to present yourself.
And that's something we live under for so much of our lives, is who do we have to show up as for other people? What are their expectations of us, instead of thinking about, well, what do we expect from this experience? And it makes it a lot easier to say no and to dial down and to take away things and not be the people pleaser that a lot, especially I think as women, we tend to be the ones who are like going to be the caretakers. I know that's changing a lot, but I still find we'll find ourselves falling into those roles so often. But when you're able to dismantle that, right, and to really think about what's going to make me happy and serve me and make me better, whether it's for my family. I mean, we both have daughters, we both have kids, but for our families and how we show up every day. And I see that example, like my daughter is in high school and the science department was getting rid of a lot of textbooks. So she immediately went and she found some books that she wanted to take home because she is going to be a scientist. That's who she is, and I'm honoring who she is. And I love that she already knows her brand at such a young age, because I certainly didn't. But she also knows my brand really well. So she asked, well, what's going to happen with the rest of the books after teachers or students want to take them? And these are old textbooks. Nobody wanted them. So she said, Mom, can we use them for one of your charities? I was like, of course. So I love that she knows herself so well at 15, but she also knows me so well that she knows that I would want to repurpose those books for one of the nonprofits that we're involved in, because those books might not be good for her school, but they'll be great for other students, whether it's in another country or in other parts of the United States that might not have access to those kind of textbooks.
Well, and of course, you don't want to be mercenary about things like the charities or the nonprofits that you work with or give to. But if you were looking to hire someone to work with you, 'cause small team, work closely together, you might tell that story to say, this is what we do on top of the things. It's important for us. And the thing is, you aren't writing a check to get 50,000 new books for somebody. You're like, no, can we stop by with a car and pick these up and then take them someplace?
Yeah.
That's showing exactly what you would expect of an employee of your company, because here's the reality. If you have a company with your name on the door, or you're the founder or the CEO of it, the
Right.
DNA of that company is your DNA.
Exactly.
Until you are no longer with the company. And whoever bought that company and didn't keep you with it, they just bought a shell with no heart.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, one, what is the number one concern that you find your students are most concerned about when it comes to what you're teaching at USC?
I think one of the things that they're most concerned about is a couple of them know what they want to do for work. A couple of them have very strong ideas for companies that they want to start. But most of them need an outside observer. And I think because I work in this area for my day job, right, as well, it makes it a little easier. So I'll be talking to a student and they'll say, well, I don't really know how to distill my values and who I am into a positioning statement. And I'll say, okay, let's talk through this. And they'll start telling me what their values are. They'll tell me like how other people have. We did a lot of the exercises that you mentioned in class, right? Like ask a friend, ask your parent, like ask people around you what they think of you, what are words that come to mind when they think about who you are as a person. And then I'm able to say, okay, here's what it is, here's who you are, and here's how it plays into what you want to do and what you said were your purpose and vision and mission for your personal brand. And so I think they have a fear of saying who they are, of leaning into that, or they feel like they don't know themselves well enough, when in truth, it's right there. They do know. They just need somebody else to help them, guide them, I guess, to that aha moment where then they can say, okay, yeah, and then they can lean into who they are. And again, it's not easy. It's something that we go back. I know I've always kind of known who I am, but I also have had a lot of times where I felt other, or I felt like, oh, I need to be this kind of person for this role or this job or this thing that I'm doing. And it's taken a long time to get to the point where I'm now saying, no, this is who I am. This is who I can deliver my best work to. So going back to that conversation, if we can get them to do that now, even if we can get younger people to do that now and really figure out the essence of themselves, that's going to create a richer world for all of us, a world where we get to have these authentic experiences, where we all want to buy brands, I think, that we can see who they are and what their values are, and we can feel attuned to them. So how lovely would that be if with these younger generations, that's just who they are and how they live every day. Think about what that's going to change, how that's going to change things in 5 years, 10 years, a couple decades from now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, and I want to talk more about that next week, but we're kind of at the end of this episode of the Nonfiction Brand podcast. And I want to remind people that every edition of this podcast is brought to you by this bad boy, a book called Nonfiction Brand: Discover, Craft, and Communicate the Completely True, Completely You brand you already are, written by a guy named DP Knudten. It's available at Amazon.com. Go check it out. And if you get a copy, let me know what you think. I certainly would like that. I also want people to know where they can learn more from or get in touch with you, Anika. Where do you hang out most online in the old internets?
On the old interwebs, I have all the socials: Amplify with Anika, Your Brand Amplified. But LinkedIn is probably the best way to get a hold of me. And it's probably where I post the most original content, with everything that we do: podcasting, teaching, working at an agency. It's hard to manage to be on all the socials all the time. And then to reach out to me, LinkedIn or fullcapacitymarketing.com. You can learn more about all the different things that we do, and you can hit the contact button to schedule a call.
Well, that sounds great. And for listeners of the podcast, let me say that again. That sounds great. And for listeners on the podcast, you should know that Anika is spelled Anika, and Jackson is spelled exactly the way you'd think it should be. Jackson. That's Anika Jackson. And I, of course, am your host, DP Knudten. And she is
Anika Jackson.
And we'll be back next week with more about nonfiction branding and getting your brand and amplifying it the Anika Jackson way. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Pause. So, live stream watchers, time has just shifted. We are now 7 days into the future as we pop back in. And I want to talk about, let's see, we were kind of talking about how especially younger people are a little bit hesitant/reticent to get out there and talk about their brand, because some people, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but based on what I heard you say, some of them are saying, I really don't know who I am or what I do. To which I say, yeah, you kind of do. And I'm going to point right at your daughter. The story that you told about your daughter at age 15 wanting to get surplus or old science textbooks because she was going to be a scientist. There's a 15-year-old woman who knows exactly what she wants to do. And that's based not on, I think I'll be a scientist this week, but on the fact that I'm intrigued by systems, or I like digging into the founding principles on stuff, and I want to be able to quantify that. And again, I don't know your daughter at all. I didn't even know you had a daughter. But I'm going to say that she already knows that she's got an analytical streak in her that is very important to the who that she is. Am I wrong in this?
No, she's known who she is for years. I think she was probably 12 when she wanted to be a neuroscientist, and it hasn't changed. What she wants to study as a neuroscience researcher has changed and shifted, but she's been reading books from David Engelman and other prominent neuroscientists for years. Anything she can read about it. She's had her master plan of, okay, here's what I need to do in middle school. Here's what I need to do in high school. I want to go get my undergrad, and I'll do this and this. And then she wants to get her PhD. So she's very much who she is. And it's really funny because I do feel like we're all born who we are for the most part. And we are all born with the special sauce, the special talent, the interest that makes us who we are. And a lot of times we lose that, right? We lose our way. We get swayed by other people. We're not confident in who we are as a brand. But when I look back at my life, a big part of who I always was bringing people together, creating collaborations, amplifying whether it was events or people, and creating these safe spaces for people to be who they were. And that is what I do now. I just do it in a different way. And I've realized that for me, PR and marketing is the right way to do it, and podcasting and all that fun stuff.
What? Okay, I love what you just said, because I agree with you. You are born the way you are, and life is about uncovering or discovering who you actually are. Some
Right.
people, like your daughter, know it early. You know, we all have friends who knew they wanted to be a physician at age 6 or something. You know, they broke their arm when they were 6. They were fascinated by watching the doctor put the cast on their arm, and they decided, oh, I want to do that. Well, a lot of us aren't that,
Mhm.
but we do know certain things about ourselves. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I
Mhm.
knew very, 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 very early on that the stage I felt most comfortable on had a performance aspect to it.
Mhm.
And what I mean by a stage is when I present concepts to a client, that's a presentation. It's a stage, and I present, and I do it pretty well from what I hear. But also I play music. That's part of who I am, that kind of performance thing. And
Mhm.
I initially thought, well, what am I? I'm a writer. Why? Because I'm a copywriter. That's the job title that was given me when I started working at
Mm.
an ad agency. And the answer is no. Writing is the tool I use.
Yes.
I am not the tool. I am the craftsman.
Mm.
And you said exactly that about yourself. You talked about the things you do, and then happened to mention at the end, oh, and by the way, PR is the kind of the tool I utilize to make connections and collaborations happen. Listeners, do you understand what we're talking about here? It's about discovering the craftsman in you, the craftsman in you, the craftswoman in you, and not focus on the tools. So if you currently play with video,
Mm.
great. You're not defined by what camera you can afford.
Right.
You're defined by the fact that you tell visual stories via motion media. And the thing is, motion media is going to change over time. Motion media back in caveman days was the shaman who is standing with the fire reflecting in such a way that the shadows cast on the wall made him look like the vicious bison that was attacking him, you know? And he was telling a story visually. They
Yeah.
didn't have cameras back then, but he was a visual storyteller or a visual
Mm.
communicator.
I love that.
The tools are going to change. The craftsperson can master all the tools.
Yeah.
Do not define yourself by your tools.
Uh,
And
uh,
is that something that your students at USC are starting to come to terms with, or are starting to look at? And again, we talked about Andre in last week's episode. We might as well talk about Andre again, just because
well,
he's so clear. He
oh, so clear.
knows.
Yeah. There's no question. It's really amazing. I mean, actually, after class last night, he came up to me and said, I have my first client for my agency. And he was very clear on what he wanted to do. We've been working on a lot of that brand for him and just haven't had to do too many tweaks or too many suggestions for him. And his ask was, would I be willing to consider this person being on my podcast? Even though they were newer, this person was also a recent master's graduate and was really starting out. And I said, of course, it doesn't matter how much experience they have necessarily, as long as they can tell a good story and tell the story of who they are, their brand, and why they're doing what they're doing. And the lessons learned along the way. And they might not have as many lessons as some of us who are a couple decades older, but they're still going to have something of value to add to a conversation. So I said, you know what? A lot of times I'll say no to younger people sometimes, depending on how they approach me, how they pitch me to be on the podcast. But I know Andre, I know he'll set his client up for success. And I said, listen to some episodes, fill out this form. By the way, this form that you're filling out for your client for the podcast, this is exactly what you need to know when you're pitching other podcasts. You need to have these questions answered. You need to know, you need to have a bio, you need to have great, clear photos. You need to have the questions that they're willing to answer, topics that they want to talk about. Have all this information ready. It makes it a lot easier for us as podcasters when somebody comes with a very clear pitch. And I trust Andre already to know that he will deliver a client that is ready to be on the podcast.
And look
So,
at
but
this kid. He's already built his brand with you, and you now have part of his spiel that you're telling me, and
yeah.
you're part of his unpaid sales force, for crying out loud.
Oh, I mean,
Why?
that's
Because he knows what he's doing, and I'm kind of blown away.
it's one of those things that I love. When I That's part of why I love teaching, because I will say, let's schedule office hours. Anybody who wants to is a student of mine, or even if they're not a student of mine, but they want to learn something, they can schedule an office hour and I will talk to them about their brand. And I'll think about, so for Andre, the first time we had a conversation, I said, okay, afterwards, I gave him a list of maybe 10 people I can connect him with who are in the music industry, specifically in the DJ world, or work with DJs or work at labels or have released their own music. Said, here are some people to look at. I want you to do some research on each one and then come back to me and let me know which introductions. I'm not going to make them all at once. I want to make sure that I'm being careful of these relationships, time, and also of yours. So think about what you want to ask them and come back to me with a list of who you want to be introduced to first. And he's done that. He's done the work. And that's makes it so fun. And total sidebar, I've also had USC grad students who are in programs that I teach, getting their master's, find me through the podcast
Hmm.
and then realize I was a professor at USC and say, hey, I have been listening to your podcast. Then I realized that you teach here in my program. Can I sign up for your class? And I've had to say no because my class is full. But I'm like, I send that on, right? And I also let them know you could take it from this other person, or if you just ever want to have a conversation and ask me questions, I'm happy to answer. And
Well,
that's what I see in you too. That's why I was like immediately drawn to. We just met. I just got your book, but we're gonna do podcast swapping because I want you on my podcast, and then you were kind enough to invite me on yours. I was like, okay, let's get you into the class first because I know that you'll bring so much value, and that you are somebody who wants to teach and help. You don't want to just keep it all inside yourself, right? That's why you have 2 books. That's why you have podcasts. That's why you have success you have, because you're willing to share from your experience.
yeah, well, and the whole thing too is that sharing, you know, I don't, you can call it karma, you can call it fate, you can call it whatever you want, but I believe that there is a finite amount of energy, and
Yes.
some of it's not good energy, some of it's very good energy. You get to choose which type of energy you embrace in this world, and you get to choose whether you're going to hoard that energy to yourself or you're going to share it with others.
Yeah.
I know that hoarding it doesn't do anything for me, but I know by getting it out there into the world, I don't, is there a line of sight directly to a dollar bill associated with that energy sharing? No, never. Until there is. And you don't
Right.
know where that, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Well, you don't know where that second point is yet. It's that old Steve Jobs Stanford graduation speech where he talks about all the straight lines in your life you never see until you turn back and look and you see, oh, I took this class on calligraphy at Reed College in Oregon that taught me a sensitivity toward typography, which made me make sure that the first Macintosh computer actually cared about fonts, even on dot matrix printers, to the point that anyone who had a creative component in their soul said, oh, PC versus Mac. I like the Mac because they actually care about typography. And all of a sudden, every creative in the world wants to work on Apple Macintosh computers. And if they're forced to go to an agency that only has Windows, frankly, I know creatives who went into interview, and when they saw that the creatives had to work on Windows machines, they didn't take the job.
Yeah.
Why? Because they knew they could not stare at that ugly Windows machine every day. There's a J.J. Abrams TED Talk that's brilliant too, where he talks about Apple computers, and he talks about how that MacBook that he uses to write his scripts on actually inspires him to be better.
Wow.
Because he is so thrilled by the design and the sensitivities and the subtleties of it. Some people don't get it. Well, guess what? He does. I do. Creatives all over the world do. And that's why, I'm a pain in the butt when it comes to Apple products. I own Apple stock, by the way, full disclosure, because I love that company, because that company has a brand that is very clear.
Yeah.
It's not about the hardware. It's about the user experience. They design user experiences. I would say they even design user delight.
Oh, I was delighted today when I downloaded the latest update, 17 point whatever, and I'm looking at all the fun things that I need to learn how to do. But they add a lot of fun to the user experience, and you want to be surprised and delighted, right? We all do, and that's something that we can bring. But I want to go back to something that you said, because I one thing that's interesting about my brand is that I do a lot, right? I am a single mom. I'm invested a lot in philanthropy. I have a couple nonprofits that I've started that I'm still very involved with. I have a podcast. I teach. I also have a job as doing PR and operations for a marketing agency and consultancy. I also created an online curriculum. I'm also an author now. But and I said I do all these other things, and people always wonder, like, how do you do all things? And for me, they're not all separate little things, and I put them into my mind map and my big puzzle and make them make sense and not necessarily take time away from each other, because I am saying no to the other things that don't make sense. But without the things that I do, I wouldn't have the relationships that I have, right? I'm from Kansas. I've lived in Kansas City. I've lived in Chicago. I've lived in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston. I have relationships from each point in my life and all the different jobs and experiences I've had, whether it is nonprofit or whether it is at an agency. And those relationships serve me really well. People remember me from those times, and then they hire me for other things. So they recommend me to their friends, or I know that I can go back and say, hey, I have somebody who you should work with. So it's really beautiful the way it works. And I've had to lean in, though, and trust my instincts to be who I fully am, which means, yeah, I might be tired on weekends and trying to cram in a whole bunch of stuff and finish grading papers while I'm taking my daughter to tennis or to whatever activities with her friends. But that's okay, because there's a finite amount of time I have to do these things. And I know that I am so enriched by the relationships that I've made through each one of these activities. And maybe, like you said, it's not a through line to financial, but there is a line where it does get to a reward, whether it's time well spent with somebody, a great friendship, financial reward, an opportunity to do something really cool you wouldn't have been able to do.
Yeah. Well, the key word, I just want to point out to listeners, how many times did Anika say, or actually pronounce the word relationship in the last 5 minutes? Probably closer to 10 than 1. There's a reason for that. We're talking about her. We're talking about her brand. Is there a difference between her and her brand? No, there is not. And the thing that you clearly understand, that every good brander understands, is that brand is about relationships, not just transactions. Sales is about transactions. How can I get you in this car? What's it going to take to get you in this car today, says the oily used car salesman. He just wants the transaction. If you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, what was it? Blink, I think, where he talks about a used car, or not a used car dealer, but a car salesman who does not profile anyone. Because a lot of car sales guys, you walk up and they profile you and go, you have no money. I'm not going to talk to you. Exactly. This guy goes, and Malcolm Gladwell was interviewing this older guy who was the top salesman at this car dealership. And he says, how do you become the top salesman here? And he said, I don't profile anybody. Because I'll be honest with you, the guy who rolls up in the dirty pickup truck, who gets out and he's got muddy boots and he's wearing overalls and a Carhartt jacket and a trucker hat, he's a farmer who just sold his entire crop. And he's got several $100,000, and he's going to pay cash for a $55,000 King Ranch version, whatever it is. And the other thing is, he's going to buy another one for his son. And for this guy that no other salesperson would touch because of the way they looked,
right,
he's going to get this $100,000 worth of sales and any future business from this person.
Exactly.
Because he's creating relationships, not going after transactions.
And that's the difference between a salesperson and a great salesperson, is they understand it's about that relationship building. The first transaction, and I think you talk about this as well, the first transaction is the most important one. It's the second one, it's the third one, it's the fourth one. What is going to be, if you're thinking about sales, the lifetime customer value, right? Like, how are you going to continue interacting and making and serving your customers? And it's something that people usually do pretty poorly. Whether it's you capture people's information, you might be e-commerce. You have an interesting brand. People like to buy from you, but are you nurturing that relationship? Are you sending coupons if somebody hasn't bought from you in a while? If you see that they like buying a certain color, are you making sure to remind them whenever you have a new product in that color that they like to purchase? Are you sending a happy birthday message, or are you just collecting their birthday and not doing anything with it? So how are you creating that relationship and that dialogue that creates that love for who you are and for your brand? And it's going to create that consistency. It's going to make you the brand people talk about with their friends, that they recommend to other people, and that they're going to continue coming back to and buying from.
And the funny thing is, you don't know what is going to be the thing that delights them. I'm reminded of the fact that I don't follow rules very well. I just don't. All the rules, but I understand the value behind the concept of the rule. So the old sales thing of no sale requires less than X number of touches with the consumer, the customer, your audience. Okay, you've got to have touches, meaning an email. Maybe it's a phone call if necessary. Maybe it's a shared this, that, or the other thing. My favorite way to reach out and touch someone that I want to keep a relationship going on with is sending like an email and say, hey, I was just watching the Rose Bowl, and I just wanted to point out that I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, home of the Wisconsin Badgers, and they actually wiped your team's butt. So, and what happens then, especially if I'm talking, especially to another guy, because guys do that ribbing thing, they will love it and give it right back just as hard in a wonderful way. That's kind of a way of saying, yeah, I like you. I like you enough to give you crap.
Yeah.
If you are, and this is where men are different than women. Men, if you give a guy crap and he's your friend, he's going to laugh and then give you crap right back. And that secures the relationship for the next 6 months to a year. So it doesn't have to be I found this Wall Street Journal article that I thought you might find enlightening, although that could be absolutely perfect if that Wall Street Journal article is addressing something that you talked about with that person. Like, I don't know, let's say that they want to open up a relationship with a vendor in Shanghai, and it's an article about Shanghai, vendor relationships with Americans, the challenges they're facing. Oh, perfect. We talked about this. Yeah. I saw it. I'm sharing it with you. What does that do? It literally reinforces the fact that, one, we had a conversation. I was listening. I listened so much. I found something that can serve you. Maybe you've already seen it. I still get credit for sharing it with you, and boom, that relationship gets a little bit deeper. And that's the goal. And one of the things I want to address too is you talked about all the things you do. Is it part of a master strategy? Yeah, you've kind of indicated that you've got a mind map where you've got, at least in your head, how these things are all interrelated. But is it a 150-step strategy that you just check things off every day? No, you just do what you can do the way you do it, and it perpetuates itself. And why does it continue to perpetuate itself? Because that's the way you roll. I love that phrase. That's the way I roll. Because that's it. I roll. I don't have to struggle. I just kind of roll down the street. This is the way I do things. And if you don't like it, great. I don't have to waste time on you. You don't have to waste time on me.
Yeah.
Because again, brands, the most powerful word brands can use is the word no. No, we don't do that. We won't do that. That's totally against brand. The whole, I'm sure you use this lingo all the time. Is it on brand? Is it off brand? If it's off brand, we don't do it. We don't even have to talk about it. We don't have to waste our breath on it because we know what our brand is.
And when you go off brand, things usually don't go very well, right? When you stay on brand, things go in the right direction because you're pouring the right energy, that positivity into something. I've had circumstances where I'm like, oh, I'll work with that person. They're not quite exactly the kind of person I usually work with, but they have a lot of money to spend. It never works out, right? Something happens with a relationship. They get distracted by something else. They come up with an excuse to stop working with you. You're not able to deliver what they want because they keep changing their mind. Like there's so many examples of that when you go off brand, what that can do. And you're right. And it is hard sometimes for people to understand what the connections are between all these different things. And you have to really spell it out and show them. But once they see it, they have that aha moment that helps them understand who you are. But the number one thing, right, is show up, be consistent. So I show up for my podcast. Sometimes I have to cancel episodes because life happens, but I then send a special link or I make it up to the person. I show up for my daughter. I show up for my students. I show up for my job. Like I show up and I do the best work I can do that day. And if I can't deliver my best work, then I'm transparent about why I can't. But I know who I am and I know what value I bring. And if that's no longer something that works for both parties, then that's fine. And I'll take my energy somewhere else, right? But for now, knock on wood, it's working and it opens up a lot more opportunities when you just live in your brand authentically, when you don't try to placate other people or be somebody that you're not. And it evolves and it changes. If people asked about my brand in Houston, Texas, it was more of like, I chair galas, I sit on boards, I'm really into fashion, I do blah, blah, blah. I have a social club. And then when I moved back to LA, I was like, I don't have to do any of that stuff. I liked it at the time, and I still do some, but I can also just really hone in on who I am. And just by being me, get clients and get opportunities.
Well, and that's the key. Who you were in Houston was no different than who you are in Los Angeles. You changed some of the trappings, maybe some of the tools you use,
exactly.
maybe some of the venues you show up in.
Right.
You don't do that anymore. Have you changed? No. If anything, you've grown to the point where you go, oh, I kind of did that. Man, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't for the 100% right reasons for me. So I'm shedding that. Like it's a sweater that doesn't fit anymore. Yeah. I don't have to keep that sweater in my closet. I can shed that sweater. I can give it to somebody else for that matter, especially when you know exactly who you are, what you do, and how you do it.
Yeah.
Well, once again, Anika, you have been such a wonderful new friend, and I'm delighted to have met you. And I know that we are going to have a long-term relationship because when you find someone that you feel like you're a tribe member with,
totally.
Grab them, embrace them, and never, ever let them go. Because the people who get you are far fewer than the people who don't. So if people get you, put them in, keep them in your life because they are the ones that maybe they'll never write you a check. Doesn't matter. There'll be a character reference. There'll be a business reference. There'll be an evangelist for your services, or even just you know who you should talk to? Mm-hmm. If they're part of your referral network, what is that worth? Huge. Oh. So When you find someone like Anika Jackson, you got to bring them into your tribe. Welcome to the tribe called the Nonfiction Brand. In fact, this podcast was brought to you by the book version of the tribe, and that book is called Nonfiction Brand. Discover, craft, and communicate the completely true, completely you brand you already are. You can get it at the House of Jeff Bezos, Amazon.com. Just search for Nonfiction Brand. And my last name, Knudten, spelled K-N-U, D as in David, T as in Tom, E as in Edward, N as in nothing. Anyway, that's it for this week on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. I am, of course, your host, DP Knudten, and she is
Anika Jackson.
And you can follow her at her Your Brand Amplified podcast, which is available any place fine podcasts are free. Check that out. That's it for this week. I'll be talking at you again next week. Bye-bye. Okay, live stream viewers. This is where I get to say goodbye to you. And Anika, go ahead and say goodbye to our non-existent live stream viewers. I don't know if anyone's watching. Doesn't matter because it's not about metrics. I don't know about you, but I don't pay a lot of attention to metrics because if I did, I would stop doing what I'm doing. Because I would compare those metrics with someone else who has more, and that would make me feel bad. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I look at metrics somewhat, but I measure it more in terms of how many people want to be on my podcast. What are people saying about my podcast? Who are listening? How are people finding it? Getting value out of it that I'm trying to bring. And I think it's interesting when I have clients say, oh, I want to know all the numbers of every podcast you're pitching me for before we, yes. And I was like, that's not the right approach. If you get the right, you're getting in front of the right person or the right people, that's what matters.
All it takes is one. All it takes is one.
Yeah. So that's, yeah.
All right. So Anika, stay on the line as I kind of wrap up this live stream. Viewers of IMNSHOW, well, you know, all you got to do is listen for this. That's the theme music, and that means I'm going to be opining about something or having someone like Anika on for my podcast recording session. So you hear that music, hit that watch button or whatever it is, because we're going live. That's it for this week. I'll be talking to you the next time you hear. Come on. There we go. You hear that? Pay attention. Until then, bye-bye.